And welcome back to SuperCoach Edge. It is always a pleasure to have your company, and we are back with another video chatting about all things BBL SuperCoach. And this time, we're going to be taking a deeper dive into the fixture. In doing so, we'll be outlining strategy around starting team structure to best capitalize on double game rounds, how best to navigate the buys, and also potential trades to make along the way in order to, as I said, best capitalize on those double game rounds, because that is the name of the game, playing to the fixture and virtually making the most of it while you can. Now, before we kick things off, as always, if you enjoy our channel, let us know by hitting the subscribe button. The goal is 2,000 subs as we edge, wink, wink, ever so closer to the 2025 AFL season kicking off. So if you can help us get there, that would be absolutely amazing. And thank you so much in advance. Now, we spoke about it briefly in our initial video with regards to the importance of the fixture and using it to your advantage in terms of not only trades, but also the starting structure of your team. Because at the end of the day, trading in the right players when it comes to trades from the right teams at the right time can be the deciding factor between having a successful season or a season where you're constantly chasing your tail, playing catch up with the rest of the competition. So first off, let's have a look at the fixture here on screen if you're watching it on YouTube. If you are tuning in via the audio podcast, feel free to jump across to the YouTube side of things. And don't forget, of course, to like and subscribe. But let me just pop it up on screen here. This is courtesy, of course, from the good folk at Honeyball. Check them out. They do some absolutely fantastic work. I mean, they have exclusive content as well. I am a subscriber of their content. They do the legwork for you in terms of deep diving to stats, the form guide of players heading into the BBL at, I guess, different T20 competitions and so on and so forth. So check them out. But as you can see here, this is the fixture as it stands heading into the 2024-2025 season. And you'll notice first up that the Stars have a double in the first round along with the Melbourne Renegades. Now, before you get hasty and start filling your team with players from both teams, this is a reminder that you need to constantly look beyond a single round at a time. And this is what separates the good BBL SuperCoaches from the rest, where the cream rises to the proverbial top. And whilst minnows are reacting on a round-by-round basis, you'll have already planned ahead for not just the round to come or the round after that, but 3 to 4 rounds in advance. Sounds pretty crazy, sounds pretty detailed, but I'm going to give you the, I guess, the guide of how to do that. So that in itself, in a nutshell, is the key to a successful season in BBL SuperCoach. It's all about planning. If you go into the season without a plan when it comes to trades and how to best capitalize on the fixture as it stands, you will fall behind, unfortunately, and you may suffer. So let's here look at the fixture with a longer term view on things, looking at these two sides as an example, that being the Melbourne Renegades and the Melbourne Stars. And whilst yes, both the Gades and the Stars have a double, looking further down the line at rounds 2 and 3, as you can see, you'll notice something that is very, very notable, and it's that the Renegades have a bye in round 3, whilst the Stars, they have a second double game round. So there are a few key takeaways from this alone. And the first is the fact that the Stars are much more appealing when compared directly with the Renegades in terms of prioritizing players from either side in your starting team. So across the first 3 rounds alone, the Stars play 5 games in 3 rounds compared to the Renegades 3 games in 3 rounds. So it's virtually just averages out to being a game per round, considering that they do have the bye, the Renegades. So breaking things down that way, you'll see the Gades are no different to, say, a Hurricanes or a Thunder, who play the same amount of games over the exact same time span of 3 rounds, despite having no doubles. But if you take an even wider view of things in 4-round cycles, you'll get an even better perspective on how to plan your starting team structure and subsequent trades. And not only that, you'll find out that there is actually another team that stands alongside the Stars as a notable side in the double game round side of things. Over the first 4 rounds, the Strikers actually play 6 games, which is the same as the Melbourne Stars, with all of the Heat, Scorchers and Sixers each playing 5 games apiece, which is exactly the same amount as the Renegades, despite the Renegades having an extra double game round, which is of course offset by their bye. This highlights the deceptive nature of the fixture if you're merely taking things 1 round at a time and not planning ahead. So whilst one team may seem very appealing in isolation, the macro lens can reveal they aren't as appealing as they may have first seemed. And this leads to the second main takeaway, and the importance of planning trades ahead in line with the fixture. So don't overload your team with too many Renegades players. Keep in mind, of course, that we only have 3 trades per round. And you'll only have opportunity to make 6 trades heading into round 3, of course, which is when the Renegades have their bye. So if you selected more than 6 Renegades players, you'll be forced to bench them and replace them with players off the bench. Or, alternatively, if you don't have viable bench replacements, potentially you'll cop donuts. So try not to fall into this trap because it is easy to do so. And this actually does remind me of what happened to the start of the season last year when the Brisbane Heat had a crazy triple game round in round 1, a single game in round 2, before they then headed into their bye in round 3. And I did warn people to have no more than 6 or 7 players from the Brisbane Heat, given the fact you only have 6 trades across the first 2 rounds to clear them out of your team. And instead, I ended up seeing many coaches being forced to gobble donuts with not enough cover off the bench, for those bye players, of course, or they were forced to play terrible scoring bench players as cover and fall behind those sides that didn't overload with Heat players, having had better team balance, which is the key here, and who were also able to play premium scorers instead without having to rely on, piddly bench cover because, as we know, when it comes to structuring your side at the start of the season, it's very hard to try and find reliable players on the bench. And more often than not, you'll have 1 or 2 loophole players. You'll have cheaper players that, we're hoping will make a little bit of cash, but they're not the scorers that we really want on field, unless, of course, we have them on a double game round. Now, we must point out it is a little bit different this time around with the Renegades, given they do have a double coming out of their bye. So the choice is yours as to whether or not you want to hold over some of those Renegades players on your bench, or if you want to clear them out of your team and prepare for grabbing players from that other team on the double in round 4 in the strikers. But the mantra still applies, not overloading your side and striking a better balance across your team without monopolising players from any one team. And this just isn't in terms of navigating buys and double game rounds either. So the word you'll find me always referencing here is diversification. And as I just said, it simply means to not overload your side with a bulk of players from any one team. Now, we know the allure of targeting players that are on their double game week to maximise your scoring potential, but we saw early last year with the Melbourne Stars, for example, they had an early double. A lot of teams overloaded on them, and because the Stars started pretty crap, it meant that their team's scoring output was limited compared to those other teams that diversified in spreading out the number of players in their team coming from different BBL sides. Now, the way I play it is I definitely take that mindset if there are multiple teams on a double game in any given round, as it allows for, easy diversification. But if a single side is on a double for a round, I tend to bend this rule a little without breaking it entirely. So if we use the Thunder, for example, they had a double game in round 4 last season and were the poorest performing team across the season. They finished last, won 1 game, weren't good. And whilst many fell into the trap of overloading their side with a lot of Thunder players to make the most of the double game round and the fact that they were the only team on it, their weekly scores virtually hinged upon the Thunder's performance, and with a bevy of terrible scores from the Thunder players across the board, it meant their SuperCoach side's total output suffered. So the key is once again finding a balance and only really cherry picking those players that are what I call the best of an ordinary bunch. And we're going to encounter it this season. We do every single year. There is a team that will have a double that we're kind of, pulled either side. Like in one mind, we're thinking, okay, we'll make the most of the double game round with this team, despite the fact they're a poor team. The other side is like, well, maybe we should sort of antipod them and, go for stronger players on a single game. So with me, I remember back last season, I actually went, when it came to the Thunder, I went with the likes of a DPP, all-rounder primo, and solid captaincy option in Daniel Sams as a priority trade in. Of course, given his history of solid floor and high ceiling, making him more of a, calculated risk. Outside of that, I added in 1 or 2 more players that presented with nice upside, and that was it. And in doing that strategy, they were actually just 1-round plug and plays, which allowed me to then turf them from my side heading into the following round. And if I had any more than 3 Thunder players, I would have been forced to hold them, which I didn't really want to do. So in that case, you're better served targeting solid primo players on a single game round from another side who have a double coming up. So as I mentioned, you've got to kind of weigh up, like if a poor performing team's on a double game round, do you maybe sort of go against the grain and get a bit of an edge over the rest of the competition by thinking, okay, well, it's a bit of a calculated risk by not investing or over-investing in this case in players from this poor performing team. Maybe you look at another player who is of a similar price point to someone who's on a double, but is in really good form, maybe has a low break even, get them in early and, hopefully they can pop off and, double game round players that majority of the competition is targeting, if they have a down game and you don't have them, or a down round rather, in the 2 games they've played, you'll be able to get a leg up over the rest of the competition. And I see it happen all the time, double game rounds, where people jump on players no matter like the form line they've got, the role in the team, just purely because of the fact that they're on the double game round. They get seduced and they overinvest, or they invest in the wrong players, and they're probably better served going for a single game round player because they may, in all likelihood, actually score more in a single game compared to, a minnow player on a double game round. So you've really got to weigh up both options and adjust accordingly. So really pay close attention to the real life performances of sides, as it can save you a lot of heartache, as it arguably holds more weight in BBL SuperCoach compared to, say, AFL SuperCoach. All you need to do is just look at the players that are named as straight batsmen in SuperCoach. If they go out cheaply and don't score in the field in terms of catches, you'll be copying a terribly low score, or in some cases a 0. And I know now we do have the flex position to give us a little bit of insurance, but it's still going to happen across the board where players aren't going to score well in maybe one of the 2 double game round games, or maybe in both. And that's kind of one thing I've learned across the journey in the time that I've been playing BBL SuperCoach, is not to be seduced or overly seduced by those teams on the double game round, because if they're crap, in all likelihood, I'll probably look elsewhere, and it gives you a little bit of a chance to, as I said, get a leg up over the rest of the competition. Now that we've run through some quick rules that I abide by, let's do a quick run through of how I plan to attack every round by round in terms of trades and my starting squad. So I'll pop up the fixture on screen here for a bit of a visual. For those people tuning to the audio podcast, again, I do apologise, but I will read them out in terms of what teams are on the double. So for round 1, of course, the Stars and the Renegades are on a double, and I'll be rolling with the majority of Stars, given they, of course, as I mentioned, play 5 games in 3 weeks. Maxi is definitely a lock as the instant VC/C choice, and from there I'll have Webster and Curran locked in as my musts. And I'll then toss up between Harper, Clark maybe, Stoinis, and perhaps another. And in terms of the Renegades players, I think I'm going to be rolling with 3 maximum. In all likelihood, I'm probably going to be carrying maybe 1 or 2 on my bench during their bye, if pricing doesn't fluctuate too wildly in terms of, being able to afford to get those players from the strikers for their double in round 2. So I may use them as collateral, potentially trade collateral from the Renegades to the strikers, but we'll just have to wait and see, because it is, as we know, it's easy enough to plan maybe a week, maybe 2 rounds out, but when it comes to sort of planning 3-4 rounds ahead, it becomes ever so difficult, because we don't know, first and foremost, form lines, but also, pricing fluctuations and so on and so forth. So we've really got to wait and see there, but that's the plan at this stage anyway. And then I'm going to prepare for the double for the Scorchers with 1 to 2 players in my starting team. So Richo or Jai Richardson is a lock in my side. Spoke about him in the previous video in terms of his value. And likewise for the Sixers, I'm going to roll with Abbott, and I spoke about it again in the previous video, purely based on value and the fact that he is massively underpriced, once again, much like Jai Richardson. Am I going to be starting Matt Short? Well, yes, at this stage I am. Just because if I don't have him in my team, I'm going to be needing to rely upon, not having too many wild cash fluctuations in order to be able to, properly afford him to bring him into my team. And I don't likewise want to be wasting trades on the, in, out moves with especially Maxi, if I'm using him as sort of that trade collateral, or that bargaining chip to go from Maxi to Short, back to Maxi, back to Short. Because, the way I see it, alternating trades on either of those doubles really is a waste, I think, especially, when we need to be thinking also about correction trades for getting those really, really low break-even cash cows in the early stages of the competition, I should say, because without those cash cows, we're not going to be able to afford to bring in the primos across the course of the season. And I think, cash generation is probably even more important when it comes to SuperCoach with the BBL side of things compared to AFL, because prices change off the first game. We don't get, 2 games to look at a player's, form, scoreline before we then are allowed to, think, okay, well, do we bring them in? Do we fade them? So on and so forth. So we really need to be on it. And if you're missing a player after, 1 price rise, it can hurt. But if you're missing them after 2 price rises, it's virtually the ship has sailed. So you have to act accordingly. And if you don't have trades to allow yourself to bring in those cash cows that you've missed, but also have, maybe an extra trade or two up your sleeve to then, plan for double game rounds across, those to come up, then it's going to be really, really difficult for you to, to build your team over the course of the season. So outside of short, in terms of strikers players, I'm going to be looking to potentially try and have 1 to 2 other striker cheapies in my team. It's a bit hard at the moment because Basley has gone down with the side strain, and Buckingham as well I think he's got a bit of a rib injury at the moment, as reported by Honeyball. Again, check them out, do some fantastic work, but we don't even know if they're going to be fit. So I might have to deviate and look elsewhere, potentially at some extra Scorchers players if I can't afford those cheaper alternative striker players in Basley and Buckingham. And I'll go through each round here as well in terms of must-have players. And I think for me, it comes down to, obviously Maxi, Curran, and Zampa. Now, Curran, spoke about him in the previous video. He is severely underpriced, bowls those death overs, really, really has a fantastic role. Zampa's another one, severely underpriced at 80K. I can't look past him in terms of value. And then, Maxi, as I said, he's a fantastic player. You've got to have him in your team, provided he is fit, of course. So keep that in mind. Let's move on to round 2, and it is, of course, the strikers and Scorchers on the double. And we're going to already have 2 Scorchers in our starting side to save on trade-ins, and likewise with the strikers. Now, we'll consider using a boost here, actually, to bring in a player who has a double game round in round 3, so just planning a little bit earlier. And then the other 3 trades will be used on boosting strikers and Scorchers numbers. And this will likely come at the expense of Renegade players, given they will be on a bye the very next round and could be even justified as a potential fade during their double in round 4 if they start in terrible form, as I spoke about earlier. Now, in terms of must-haves, I have listed here Jai Richardson, Short, Inglis, Ty, and Dorf in brackets for those last 3. But I think Jai Richardson and Short are definites. Speak for themselves. Both have, incredible form line across the journey, and especially in double game rounds. So definitely can't fade Short, I will say, but Richardson is right up there for me. Moving ahead to round 3, and as you can see here, the Heat, Stars, and Sixers, all 3 teams have a double. And I'll look to bring in a Heat player here and plan for a total of 5 Melbourne Stars at this stage and 2 Sixers players, which will all be possible with yet another trade boost, which I think of all rounds, this is definitely one that I will be using a boost to capitalise on maximising the fact that we've got 3 teams on the double game round. Now, should mention here as well that the Sixers and the Heat, they actually play each other twice in this double game round, so be very, very careful not to overload on multiple players that could anti-correlate with each other, which, as an example, what that simply means is if you're selecting potentially an opening batter from one side and then an opening bowler from the other side, and obviously, chances of both players punching out a decent score is going to be quite rare. It does depend on the type of player you're going for, but say, for example, you're going for a top order batsman, and then you've also gone for, a batsman that's maybe middle order. Which is probably a better example here, because if the opening batter goes out cheaply, in all likelihood, you're going to have that middle order batter come in and potentially score some runs. But alternatively, if the opening batter absolutely smashes it and isn't bowled out, well, your middle order selection of the other batsman, he's not going to get a chance to have a bat. So you really want to be, I guess, having an eye on what players can work with each other and what players work against each other in terms of the players on both sides, because you don't want the anti-correlation. You want, something which is going to be a bit of a happy medium. So classic example is also that I always use is in NFL fantasy for those people that play it. The wide receivers, I guess, potential for points is tied pretty much with the quarterback, because without the quarterback throwing the ball to the wide receiver is not scoring any points, and vice versa. So really, they're 2 correlating players, and if one performs well, the other one performs well, and if one performs shit, in all likelihood, the other one will definitely perform shit unless there's a quarterback change. So hopefully that makes sense, but that's just that in a nutshell. In terms of must-haves in round 3, I have listed here Maxi, Abbott, is definitely one. And in brackets here, I've got Spencer Johnson, Xavier Bartlett, and Tall Paul Walter. Now, Walter, he was an absolute dynamo last season and is more of a genuine all-rounder compared to Spencer Johnson and Xavier Bartlett. Bartlett can actually hit the ball as sort of that back end in the batting order, but Spencer Johnson, a pure fast bowler. So for me, those are probably the players that I'd be looking at very, very closely. Let's move on now to round 4, and we have the Strikers and the Renegades on a double here. Now, the 3 trades that I will be making here will be used on maximising Strikers and Renegades players, obviously being on their double. Now, I think I will prioritise the Strikers here, but it is too hard to say this far out, not knowing price fluctuations, player roles, and of course, team form lines. So that's pretty much that. Also, much like the previous round that I spoke of, we again have both of these teams on a double in the Strikers and the Gades, but they actually play each other twice in this double game round, annoyingly. So be very, very careful again not to overload on players that can, I guess, anti-correlate with each other across both teams. So really be mindful of that, and you'll be able to make the most of, getting the most points out of the players you select. In terms of the must-haves, we have listed here Short, of course, the dynamo from the Strikers, and Zampa, as I spoke of earlier, just purely based upon his value and potential high-scoring output as well when he can get on a tearer. Moving on to round 5, and this is the first round where it's all teams on singles. So for rounds 5 to round 9, which is, of course, the last round of the season, we only have 2 doubles left, which is the Thunder in round 6 and the Canes in round 8. So now is the best time to try and bring in the best single game players. And nailing your VC or C, if you can't nail your VC option first up, in a single game round can really give you a major leg up and are most important in these single game rounds. Now, in terms of must-have, as I spoke about, just load up on the best single game players that you don't have and potentially bring in any mid-season cash cows to keep cash generation ticking along. Now, you can start bringing in players to plan for the upcoming double game round, but it really does depend on who it is. And that's a bit of a segue to round 6 because we have the Thunder, who have a double this round. And as I spoke about earlier, regarding the Thunder on their double last season and the fact that they had a really poor season, and a lot of people suffered from the fact that they overloaded too much on Thunder's players, really is something that you really need to consider. Once again, the Strikers, they are on a buy in round 6, so you could use some as trade collateral. Even Short, that is Matt Short, given his high price point, allowing you more freedom to choose virtually who you want to bring in. But look to bring him straight back into your team the following round in round 7 because he is a must-have across the entirety of the year, provided that he can, maintain that MVP type form that he's had over the previous couple of seasons. So in terms of must-haves for this round, Sam's is probably the only one I would put into this category, given his high floor, high ceiling, more often than not, given his role bowling death overs and his big power hitting ability. Now, Warner is probably another one that stands out to me, given his experience in the T20 format at all levels, and Bancroft is potentially another in terms of, pure bats. But they do come with huge upside and low floors. So with that, they are risky plays, but they do get 2 bites of the cherry, at least in a double game round. And of course, as I said, with the flex position, gives us a bit of a safety net. But yeah, I much prefer those DPP all-rounder type players compared to those, single batsmen, especially single bowlers, I should say, non-DPP bowlers. They historically score more than the non-DPP pure bats. So yeah, that's something just to keep front of mind. Let's move on now to round 7. And as you can see here, again, another single game round. And I would look to potentially set your team up for the Hurricanes double game round 1 week early. And if you happen to trade out a high price primo in Short on his buy in the previous round, round 6, now would be the time to bring that legend back in. Nail your VC and C here, as I mentioned before, on a single game round, and you're set. Must-haves, I'd probably go a Hurricanes player early if their break-even is super low, and it puts them potentially out of reach as a trade target the following round, which would justify pulling the trigger early. And especially those players that have, some good form behind them, we've seen with Dooley in the past for the Hurricanes. He was an absolute dynamo. Not last season because he performed quite poorly, but the season prior to that, burst on the scene and he went up in price very, very quickly. So if you have a player like that, especially with the double game round coming up for that player's team, look to bring him in early. But otherwise, as I said, prioritize those good players across the board to help you out on the single game round, especially when it comes to VC and the C. And moving ahead to the round 8, and it is the Hurricanes, as I said, on the double. And it really does depend on the team's form, as it could be a nice anti-pod spot to fade, like the Thunder if they are struggling, the Hurricanes. Outside of potentially, I think, Meredith and or Ellis, who are relatively safe double game round players, and maybe a Jordan as well, given his ability with the bat and the ball. So those are virtually, in a nutshell, the not the must-haves, I would say. I think it's hard as well with the Hurricanes. Historically, they haven't gone too well, but I'd be looking at the pure bowlers that have been able to score well in the past, in Ellis, Meredith, Jordan as well, who, can actually score quite well. When he's in form, that is, because he does taper off in form quite often. And then there's also, as well, Matty Wade, who's playing the full season, given that he has retired from international level and could be one to take a flyer on if he's in top form. So don't mind that. Looking ahead to round 9, and all teams are on a single here as well. So it is really a lackluster way to finish the season on a single game round, but again, it comes down to targeting the best in-form players. Also look very, very closely into matchups to try and get an edge, doing Quink, along with those sides gunning for finals in must-win games against, minnow teams in lopsided contests where they've already out of finals contention, which could generate easy points. Well, there we have it. That's more of a detailed look at the fixture and rough outline of how to best maximize double game rounds when it comes to trade strategy and, of course, structuring your starting team. And we could go into further detail, but in the interest of keeping this episode short enough, we'll leave it at that. But we will leave the floor open for any of you kind folk tuning in for questions. If you want to listen down below, feel free to do so in the comments section, and we will address them in an upcoming Q&A episode. That could be on the horizon if there is enough interest. So, as I said, any specific questions, list them down below. You can hit us up on Twitter/X, supercoach_edge. Give us a follow and flick them through there and we will read them out. But as always, thanks for tuning in. Really do appreciate your company. And don't forget to like and subscribe to keep abreast of our content as it drops. If you hit the notification bell as well, it will send you a notification, I think, potentially, or you can toggle it off. But it just means that every time that we've uploaded, it will be pushed across to your main YouTube page, whether it be on desktop or on your phone app. So that is another way to keep up to date with our content as it drops. But that's it. Until next time, ladies and gents, well, we'll see you then. All the best. Catch ya.